Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm Scott Brady, your host, and I'm here with my co-host, Matt Scott. What's going on, Matt?
You know what? We're just wrapping up with Overland Expo. I think it was a really great show. So yeah, things are really good.
Awesome. And we have our guest today. We've got Rob Boheim from Australia, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about Australia. We're going to talk about traveling in Australia, and we're going to discuss what it takes to bring a vehicle into the country, what it takes to buy a vehicle in country, top places to visit, some resources that you need, some things to be mindful of when you're traveling through the country. But I've known Rob for a long time, over a decade now. Met him at the Outdoor Retailer Show, totally by accident, and he's become a longtime friend and someone that I trust completely with anything around Australia. And the reason for that is Rob and his family are the founders of the Hema Maps company in Australia, which is the preeminent mapping tool for Australians. It's available in print and as digital assets on GPS units and apps, etc. And Rob, because of that, Rob has an enormous amount of experience traveling around the country. In fact, they started this very cool project decades ago. How long ago was the first Map Patrol?
1998.
And what kind of vehicle did you use for the first Map Patrol?
Nissan Patrol, 4.2 litre turbo diesel, pretty much unbreakable. But yeah, I guess we're out there making maps. I'd been researching maps with a GPS since 1996. One of the first people to get out there with a GPS and laptop and just go drive the road. There was no better way to get the information.
And how many kilometers do you think you have driven in map patrols around Australia? Have you ever figured that out?
Yeah, a few times, Scott. And thanks so much for having me here today. It's just a pleasure to be part of the Overland community globally. I think it's probably a couple of 100,000 kilometers at least. What's that? 100-something thousand miles. And that's of actual map recording. So that's the hardcore mapping part of it. That's not just the transit part. So
yeah, that's incredible.
I've been to pretty much all over Australia, all the different corners, and to probably some of the most remote and unique places that anyone would ever go, and probably hardly anyone has ever gone. And that was always something that drove me to go down trails that nobody had ever been down before and put them on a map so that other people could come and discover them for themselves.
And you're here in America with us at the Overland Expo East. And before we get into the fun stuff on Australia, what do you think of the show so far? What's the one thing you'd want to buy personally, or what vehicle you'd like to steal the title to?
Oh, that's a hard one. I've been eyeing off these sportsmobiles for a little while. So
they are pretty cool.
I guess the concept of just traveling independently without a trailer, with everything there, but not yet for me. I've got to get my 4 kids through high school first, and then don't have to take them with us anymore. Just travel with my wife. So
yeah, that would be great. And in Australia, you've built out 200 series Land Cruisers and 70 series Land Cruisers and Nissan Patrols. When someone is thinking about renting a vehicle in Australia, what would you typically recommend that they hire?
I would start with looking at what the Australians generally use on outback trips, and make sure you can rent one of those. But that's already in place with companies like Brits in Australia that for as long as I can remember, they've been renting out Toyota troop carriers. So definitely something with a Toyota badge. It's you'd see so many Toyotas in Australia, particularly Land Cruisers and the like. You'd think that they were made there. And Toyota's got a fantastic reputation. Just about every, ranch or station owner's got a Toyota of some sort. So if you're going to get into trouble out there, then 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to find the parts really easily. The local country town, the garage there will have something in their store, or somebody driving by, or an old wrecked car at the back. So yeah, definitely a Toyota. Probably beyond that, anything Japanese made. They just seem to handle the rugged terrain, the dust, and have just really great touring setups.
Yeah, it's interesting to see because Toyota, it is definitely Toyota country.
Yeah, 100%
in Australia. And Matt, you you lived in Australia. Tell us a little bit about your time in Australia. How long were you there? What were some of the places that you traveled?
So I was there for a year. I was there running a magazine. I was the only American to be an editor of a major 4-wheel drive magazine down there. I ran Unsealed 4x4 for a bit and kind of helped grow that and contribute to that. But, I guess I'm pretty lucky in the sense that I actually lived there. And I think the things that Australians do, I guess I've done most of the eastern half of Australia pretty comprehensively. Americans, I think, I always say they get like red fever. They want to go to Uluru. They want to do the Simpson Desert. That's their image of the outback. But there's so much to Australia. Like I'm obsessed with Cape York personally. I mean, that is to me just, I think it's the best of Australia.
Yeah, you move from the desert to subtropical to full blown tropical rainforest jungle.
Yeah.
When you get up to the north, I remember how beautiful it was. Driving up there. And then one place I've not been that I've heard so many great things about is the Kimberley.
Oh man, that's on my list.
Yeah, that's on your list. You have to go. It's at the top of my list.
I think you and I like passed each other once while you were heading into the Kimberley.
Yeah. I love the Kimberley so much that, I've spent many years mapping there, but over time, but I loved it so much that several years ago, I took my whole family with a camper trailer, 200 series Land Cruiser, 4 kids, wife. And we went up to the Kimberley for 4 weeks because I'd, flown through there pretty quickly, making maps. You're in there 2 weeks. You do you work 12, 14 hours a day. Didn't have time to stop and enjoy the places. So we went back there for a whole month and just, I knew all the jewels, knew the places to spend time. And we spent 5 days in my favorite spot in the Bunga Bunga Purnululu, most amazing geological formation. And we did a full hike, the whole day with the kids. And it was just one of the best family experiences of my life so far. So.
And I guess for those of you that don't know where the Kimberleys are, that's in the far northwestern corner of Australia. It's arguably probably the most remote portion of Australia. I guess you could say.
The area is huge. There's probably maybe 20,000 people at the most in an area the size of the state of Victoria, where there's 6 million people in Australia. So it's still frontier country. You wouldn't want to be there in the tropics where the cyclone's coming in. The whole place shuts down. Really remote gorges. Some of them you can only get to by boat or helicopter. It's just a spectacular place.
Is that where that what do they call it?
Vertical falls.
Yeah, vertical falls.
Horizontal falls.
Horizontal falls.
So they have about an 8 meter tide. You can work out what that is in feet, but runs at least once a day. I can't remember, it's twice. So the tidal flow through this maybe no more than 100-foot wide gap is so strong that they call it horizontal waterfall. So you can only get there by plane or boat.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was what I noticed about my travels in Australia. I've been fortunate to cross it east, west, and north, south, all the way down to the tip of Tasmania. But what you do realize is you can get extremely remote. There are tracks that are very popular that you'll see a lot of people on. But when I did the Canning Stock route, we didn't encounter a single individual until we got to Kinarawachi in the center of the track. There was no people at all, no even tracks on the ground. You couldn't see the imprints of tires, even from vehicles that have come before.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing about the deserts in Australia. They kind of self-heal over the summer because nobody drives there over that 6 months. So the wind blows and cleans the track up again. It's nice and fresh for the next season. So, out mapping that way, Great Sandy Desert's probably some of the most isolated. We talk about self-driven vehicles or journeys. I've been out there, single vehicle, nothing but my Nissan Patrol, my mate riding shotgun in the passenger seat to rely on, and driven on tracks that weren't on any map for a whole week and not seeing another vehicle, not another soul. It was kind of came into the sort of shed at a local station and went, whoa, civilization. I'd been that much removed from seeing any other person except for a friend next to me, and been bogged for 24 hours in the middle of a clay pan in the wet on a track that wasn't on a map, and going, okay, how do we get out of this? So that's not everybody.
It's amazing.
It's not what you're going to do on every trip, but and the Kimberley is just one of those amazing jewels. It's probably for me, there's the top 5 being the Kimberley, Cape York you've talked about, Fraser Island, World Heritage, largest sand island in the world, 80 miles long. It's made entirely of sand and has some of the most amazing.
I highly recommend not to go to Fraser Island because it will ruin all other beaches for you for the rest of eternity. Everything is disappointing.
And you can camp right on the beach. You can drive right on the beach.
Yeah.
The only thing you have to be careful of is they actually do set up cops with radar guns on Fraser Island. Because it's easy to do 100K an hour on that hard pack.
Yeah,
sand.
my friend's one of them. So whenever I have friends coming his way,
to have friend.
I let him know he's coming, and he usually gives them a fake ticket. So. But yeah, there's places on Fraser Island that I don't tell anyone about because they're just so special and nobody goes there. But you've got beautiful subtropical rainforest growing on sand, crystal clear lakes.
Yeah, we were there together. I remember that, Rob. That was 2011, right?
Yeah.
So what are the other in your top 5 you got?
Well, there was 3. I guess the other 2 are really any desert area. My favorite is the Great Sandy Desert, but that takes a lot of planning. The most common one, as you guys have mentioned, is the Simpson Desert. There you've got 1,000 sand dunes to cross. You can spend 3 days doing it, or you can spend 2 weeks to doing it. And as soon as you go off a side track there, a clay panel on your own, million stars.
And you somewhat recently were the first to actually map the Madigan line, like put it in data, I believe, right?
Yeah, Hema was. I didn't get to do that one personally, but our team went out there and mapped it all out. And, that was the heart, Matt, of our whole Great Desert Tracks series that we was inspired by my father back in 1998. We were making maps all around the outback areas on the coast. And I had him doing a field trip over on the West Coast for me. And like they'd always done before, wanted to go down roads never been done before. I thought, how do we get from the West Coast to the East Coast and do it safely on a map? And it wasn't a decent map. So they came back and said, Rob, we're going to make a map of the whole interior of Australia. So, we then spent the next 6 months driving every road and track out there and putting on a map. Really, so we had the confidence to go there, but that started to unlock the whole of the heart of Australia in terms of those remote tracks because people had confidence in the map to take them places that had never been before. So Simpson Desert, number 4. I don't know. I'm probably changed my number 5 lately. It's probably was definitely the Flinders Ranges, but I've spent a bit of time in Tasmania recently, and
that's beautiful.
It's a very, very special place. Lots of great full driving down there. Beautiful wilderness hikes to do. All easily accessible. People are really friendly. The other one for the Australians is the high country, Victorian high country. But I think for North Americans, that's about 25% of the size of the mountains you get to drive on here. And having driven around, it does
have phenomenal access to those mountains.
It does.
The cool thing is there's so many roads, there's so many remote little villages.
You can spend months traveling down the east coast of Australia with all sorts of access roads to the local beaches and campsites. For 2,000 miles around the coast. Beautiful beaches, rocky headlands, campsite all to yourself.
And just remember, when you go to a beach in Australia, do some research because there may be a half a dozen different things that could eat you or sting you. Or
just don't go in the water.
Kill you in some manner. I mean, they have the box jellyfish.
Yeah.
They have giant crocs in the north.
But on a patrolled beach in Australia with surf lifesavers, there hasn't been a fatality in quite some time. I want to say, right? Like where you can swim, it's relatively safe.
Well, where you can swim is relatively safe. I'm not sure about that fatalities. We hear about them each year, sadly, but it's usually an international visitor that's not aware of the local conditions. So, but the crocodiles, the box jellyfish, that's stuff we just put on tourist brochures to keep the people out. So we've got the country all to ourselves.
As you should.
I mean, how do you think else we've got 20-something million people in a country the size of the US? So.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that are listening that want to travel to Australia, there's essentially 3 ways to do that. You can ship your own vehicle from the US or wherever you live by container. I shipped into Australia one time from Vladivostok and Magadan in Russia. But being mindful of that, we'll talk about that in a second. The next thing you can do is rent a vehicle, which Rob spoke to some degree. And the third thing that you can do is purchase a vehicle in country. But let's talk about that first, Matt. When you were there, you bought a vehicle. You bought a Troopy.
Yeah. I had a Land Cruiser troop carrier. And I think for a lot of Americans, that's the epitome of a really unobtainable vehicle. So, it was that or a Defender. And, as Rob alluded to, it really is Toyota country. I think there's a lot going for purchasing a vehicle in Australia.
I'd agree.
My usual rule is, you got to be there for a few months, right? Because there are costs associated with it. My best recommendation to people is, go over there, travel, buy something. Just make sure you buy something that's 25 years old, because then you can bring it back as a souvenir. And if you're smart, you can probably pay for your trip. So, the cool thing with Australia, some American states do it, but there are very comprehensive, vehicle inspections in Australia. I mean, Queensland's crazy. I sold my vehicle in Queensland and I had to provide a blue slip, I want to say.
Yeah, well, a roadworthy certificate.
Certificate.
You can't sell it unless you.
So you actually can't sell a vehicle.
200-point safety check. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a tail light lens on an old car, and you over tighten that little Phillips socket, and you get the tiniest bit of spider cracking on that tail light lens, and they defected me for that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, I always advocate, buying in Queensland for that reason, because even though I lived in New South Wales and in the Blue Mountains, the roadworthy checks and everything in Queensland are crazy. But what that means for you, buying a sight unseen vehicle that has a roadworthy certificate, in my opinion, there's a certain level of comfort there, because it's provided by a third party, independent, impartial mechanic that really just has to tick off these boxes. And I think it's a good indicator of that vehicle's health. You definitely don't want to buy, four-wheel drives from Hervey Bay, which is,
just in Fraser Island.
Yeah. So they're all, they've been run up the beach with salt water and stuff a lot. So if you can get vehicles from the interior of the country, I think that's always a really, a good option.
And how much did that 70 series cost?
I want to say at the time it was around 12,000 Australian dollars, and it was in 1997. I was there with the intention that I was going to stay there for quite a while, and we decided to come back. But it was relatively well sorted. Like we had the motor kind of gone through. It was 1HZ diesel, naturally aspirated. So we had the injectors rebuilt and had it tuned down at Barrama Diesel, and it was flawless. Like that thing, when we sold it, then went across Australia another like half a dozen times. So it's actually funny, but it lives currently next to your sister's house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, literally the house next door they ended up buying.
Wow.
And like Troy sends me a photo. Yeah. And there's Snoopy was my Choopy's name. So it's kind of cool how these vehicles go around.
That's so cool.
And they keep this story.
Yeah. So there's a lot of great Facebook pages where you can buy vehicles. If you want to buy a Troopy, there's a page, Troop Carriers of Australia. Mm-hmm. They have a separate, place where you can actually buy and sell stuff. I think that's where you get a lot of the good stuff these days. I mean, obviously there's Gumtree, which is basically the equivalent of our Craigslist. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit more formal, I would like to say.
Yep. And then carsales.com.
Car sales. Yeah. I mean, I highly recommend it. I mean, for us actually owning the vehicle, I think really added to the experience. I think as we'll talk about with shipping a vehicle in, I've had friends that have shipped vehicles in. I mean, Scott's vehicle that they shipped in for Expedition 7. I mean, that was, a New Zealand spec vehicle. It was very appropriate for Australia. I would, I guess, just caution, sending certain vehicles down there. I mean, depending on where you're going to go, like make sure they sell that vehicle in Australia. I think that's pretty key. You may actually run into scenarios where they may not have, like Mountain Dare sometimes doesn't have petrol or gasoline. Mm-hmm. So you're going to have to carry a lot of weight with you if you want to do the Simpson Desert.
Definitely take something down that's diesel.
Yeah. I mean, and it's an opportunity to
try something new.
Yeah. I mean, it will cost you, in my assumption. I mean, with my day job, I'm constantly shipping containers from Australia. I know what it costs. I know that the port fees in Australia are really high. Scott, you've alluded to the fact that the quarantine scenario is crazy. I mean, I have friends that have spent in excess of $20,000 getting a vehicle from a port in the U.S. to a port in Australia and back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you can, and that's a sunk cost. That's gone. You're not getting it back. Where, I mean, hey, even take half of that, you have to get the vehicle back home. buy something.
Yeah. And the other challenge you got with that is the quarantine restrictions in Australia. You know, if it's got any kind of bugs or seeds or grass or dirt on it, then they'll send it back. Yeah, they'll impound it and charge you lots of fees to clean it.
Yeah, and anyone can buy a vehicle in Australia. You do not have to have it. You just have to have an address, which, you know, I think for most overland travelers would be a relatively easy thing to do. People use their hostel address, somewhere that you can receive mail. You do not have. You just have to be in Australia legally, which means, I mean, essentially, as long as you haven't overstayed your visa.
Yeah.
And your driving license is valid. It's, you know.
And if you buy a good quality vehicle like a Toyota and do 10,000 kilometers on a round trip of Australia, at worst, you might sell it for $5,000 less than you bought it for.
Yeah.
And it's probably not even that.
Yeah. And you can find stuff.
If you buy well, you might even sell at the same price because those Land Cruisers and Toyotas in general just hold their value so well.
You can find stuff that's completely outfitted very, very easily. So you can essentially fly in, maybe spend a few days making those personal modifications you want. There's a lot of 4-wheel drive shops that will do pre-trip maintenance for you and inspections. I mean, it's really well set up for doing that. There is actually a culture of like the backpacker cars there, which you should avoid.
Yep. One of the other things to watch is just the simple things like fuses. The local gas station in Outback Australia probably won't have the fuse that you need for your truck. And maybe the suspension's not really set up for just that level of endurance on washboarding and corrugations and rough roads. So.
Yeah, I found people will ask, how are the roads in Australia and how do they compare to the roads in the US? And I typically relate it to, we have the opportunity in the US to do recreational overlanding, which means that we can go seek out very difficult routes that maybe only last a day or two, very technical terrain like you'd find in Moab. And it's not to say that Australia doesn't have technical terrain, because it does. But what you experience in Australia is abusive roads. So the corrugations that you'll experience are extremely abusive to the vehicle. So what would work well here, like let's say a 4-door Jeep Wrangler Rubicon would work really well for those remote technical routes that we would do in the US. If you try to take a Wrangler across the Oodnadatta track or anything that's heavily corrugated, I don't know how it would survive. They're just not designed for that kind of condition. And because of that, Jeep Wranglers don't sell well to those traveling in the center of Australia. They do sell in Australia, but they don't use them for that purpose.
I mean, I do in Jeep's defense, I do think the new ones are maybe in a different category, but they don't really sell well. I mean, it again, Toyota country.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
The long wheelbase helps. Some of the vehicles like the Gladiator, it looks a lot more suitable. Nice wide stance, long wheelbase. And assuming it's made as strong as a Toyota, then it'll go fine. So.
Yeah, I think it's all about durability in Australia.
It really is.
The way you would build a vehicle here, like you'd be crazy to take a Heim joint long arm suspension setup down to Australia. In my opinion, I mean, you're going to blow through Heim joints in a trip. You want. I keep saying that this weekend. You want factory bushings. You want stuff that has real durability to it. All of the failures we experienced in our trip, they weren't major failures, but they were all related to corrugations. A shock mount coming off, a bushing or a sway bar or something. I mean, literally just rattling loose.
Right.
I have a photo somewhere of putting a beer can in between the corrugations, and I took a photo, and you could just see the top of it. I mean, they are massive. Because I get these road trains that come through here in some of the areas, are just a lot of recreational, 4-wheel drive touring traffic.
Yeah. And the rocks on the road, I mean, they've just been waiting there for eons to puncture somebody's unsuspecting tire.
And we have to remember, too, that most people that will be traveling to Australia do not drive a right-hand drive vehicle. So when you're traveling in the backcountry, you will tend to start to favor the center or the crown of the road because it's easier to drive on. But remember, when you come to those blind crests, that you need to get over to the left side of the road so that you don't do a head on with the other person who's going to the right side of the road from the other way. So you have to be really careful with that because our natural instinct as those of us who drive left-hand drives is to swerve one way because that's what our muscle memory tells us to do. So we have to be very mindful when we travel in a country with that drives on the different side of the road. And then after you've been on the dirt for days, you're going to get on the highway and half of the people I've traveled with, they just pull out on the wrong side of the road.
I get screwed up in parking lots. Like, there's really no like kind of rules in the parking lots. And that's what always gets me. You make the mistake in the parking lot and then continue it out on the road.
But to those points, if you're looking you're going to look to buy a vehicle down there, then be looking for something with decent suspension, good quality tires, because your tires can quickly destroy your trip. Make sure you've got a decent tire gauge. They're the best insurance for your tires. But protection equipment, bull bars, side bars, particularly bull bars on the front, rear bars, absolutely critical, especially if you're planning on doing any night time travel in the dawn or the dusk. You can be anywhere in Australia, and anything from a kangaroo or a mob of kangaroos or an emu or a 800-pound black cow at night walks out on the road, maybe even a camel. These animals, which we have lots and lots of, and they're beautiful, but they can destroy your trip pretty quickly.
Well, you and I were driving along the Great Australian Bight, and Rob was driving, and I can't remember. I was maybe listening to a book or a podcast or something, and then it sounded like the truck exploded. Yeah, and we got hit by a kangaroo in the driver's side door. It's amazing to me that this animal, it actually ran into us. Yeah, it was fine. It would have been okay if it had just stopped, but it literally ran right into the side of the vehicle.
That's crazy.
And of course the poor thing perished because of it, and which is really hard to experience, because kangaroos. I remember the first time I went to Australia, I was driving from Brisbane down towards Sydney, and I was so excited to see my first kangaroo. And I saw lots of kangaroos, but none of them were alive. Yeah. They were all dead on the road. And like finally, after like 5 days, I finally saw my first live kangaroo, and they are absolutely adorable creatures. They're incredible. Yep. They're incredible to watch.
Yeah, they're really cool. They're really cool.
They're extremely
Don't feel bad about killing one or two. Save yourself first. Just brake hard and brake straight, because we got plenty more. They'll regrow. So.
Yeah.
And this shouldn't intimidate you from going to Australia. No. We've talked about the box jellyfish and the great whites and the spiders and the snakes and everything. I don't know. If you're a traveler in the American Southwest, there's probably as many things that can kill you here. I mean, whenever I have this conversations with Australians, they're like, you guys have mountain lions, you guys have grizzly bears, you have black bears, you have great whites too, you have the jellies too, you have the snakes and the spiders. I mean, honestly, I've spent, a pretty good amount of time camping in the middle of nowhere in Australia, and like the amount of times I've seen snakes or spiders is, pretty rare. I mean, I think here those animals kind of do encroach on you because we've encroached on so much of their habitat. In Australia, I guess I would say, like, well, why would a snake really want to be by the road when they have a million acres of undisturbed habitat?
Just watch out for the drop bears.
Drop bears. Those
especially in Fraser Island.
Those are really dangerous. Yeah, do your research, folks. Stay safe out there. It's really important. So when we talk about planning a trip to Australia, Rob, what would you recommend? What are some good resources to get information on traveling in Australia? What are some great websites to look at? Obviously, there's several mapping choices. Hema's, in my opinion, is one of the best out there, and the one that I use. But I think it does require a little bit more planning, because it's so easy to either get lost or to get stranded. It's really a good idea to have a plan for how much fuel you're going to need, where there's going to be service. So how would you recommend people start to plan for their trip?
Yeah, I'd spend some time on websites like you're talking about. HemaMaps.com is great, but that's probably more maybe a secondary thing once you figured out where you want to go and you want the map products. There's a wonderful website in Australia called ExploreOz.com.
Great site.
oz.com. It's really a community-built site, community-built content from hundreds of thousands of explorers that have driven the trail, posted up their trail, got information and photographs and the like. You can even purchase vehicles or do online trading through there. Heaps of information about how to prepare for your trip. Even some of the major media organizations like Camper Trailer Australia, Unsealed 4x4 that Matt used to work with. But probably be aware that in a lot of those cases, the travel articles really they're about attracting the eyeballs, to get people to click through. And it's probably some of the community-driven sites like ExploreOz.com.
Yeah, 100%.
Which are much better because you're getting authentic information from travelers that have got no agenda to promote a particular area.
I'm always a little bit skeptical of Australian media. A lot of there's a lot of pay-to-play stuff going on.
And a lot of forums like, was it Prado.com?
Prado Point and 4x4earth.com.
4x4earth is a great one, yeah. And then you'll connect through to real users of real vehicles, ask them about what issues they've had with different models.
And the Facebook groups too, once you do buy a vehicle, can be a huge resource.
Yeah, so do your homework online in terms of, guidebooks and maps. You can buy them when you get there. Most of the local gas stations will have something. Or check out something like, mapworld.com.au if you want to buy it and ship it overseas. But a number of the Australian products, the best Australian products are available in even on Amazon now, and through a European website called Cronin. But I'd say leave most of that till you actually get there. So in terms of paper product, guidebooks, definitely worth having some kind of digital navigation, whether it's, and make sure it's completely offline. All the Hema apps offline, but there's a number of others available. Of course, it's a misnomer that you actually need a cell phone signal to get a GPS in your phone. That's actually in the hardware. So, your mobile phone or your iPad will run the GPS will run for that for weeks and weeks in the outback without ever getting a mobile phone connection.
That's right.
So it's got to get your maps offline or dedicated GPS.
I still have my Hema Maps app that I, when I'm writing a story or something, I have all the tracking on, and I can see exactly where I went. So it actually makes a kind of a cool.
Yeah, so about $60 US. Use it on 5 different devices, all offline. So that's a great way to go. You can look at a dedicated GPS like the Hema Navigator or the new Garmin Overlander. One of the special arrangements I was able to make in the last couple of years is getting Hema Maps finally onto Garmin units. So all the new Garmin GPS devices, just fantastic devices, are now available with Hema Maps offline.
That's cool.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
So, because then you have the reliability of the Garmin units.
Exactly.
They're designed to reliably record tracks.
And the reliability of the Hema Maps. Then another great resource for there's so much free camping. There's an app called Camps Australia Wide, which is credible reference guide.
That's that massive book too,
yeah, massive book.
Yeah,
it's available on an app. There's also a cheaper one called WikiCamps. Not quite as accurate, but it's a user community-based one. There's thousands of free campsites in Australia and some beautiful locations.
We use WikiCamps quite a bit, but we did find a few that were a little bit sketchy. Places that people were saying were fine to camp, but actually the local council is, no camping or something like that. It's definitely got to watch out.
Cool. And if you were to recommend, like if someone had 2 weeks to go to Australia, which is the typical American vacation, if they had 2 weeks, where should they fly into? Where would you recommend that they go? And give someone like an oversight of what they would experience along the way.
Well, maybe give you 3 options. One, you would fly into Brisbane in Queensland, hire a vehicle in Brisbane, with a Land Cruiser, take it up to Fraser Island for 2 weeks, and have a most spectacular time out on your own on the beach, enjoying that. You could fly into Cairns and hire a Toyota Land Cruiser again. Some of them you can get set up with rooftop campers and the like. 2 weeks easy out of Cairns to the tip of Cape York, top of Australia and back. But they normally, if you get a rental, then some of the most extreme tracks that you see on YouTube on the old Telegraph track, they won't let you stay there. Some companies say, well, if it's on a Hema map, you can go there, and if it's not, then you can't. So that gives you a lot of place to go. I think beyond that, I guess other places like flying to Alice Springs if you want to do the Red Centre. Unfortunately, for people that want to climb Uluru, that's finishes at the end of this month.
It's done. Yeah, that's right.
It's done. But
And that's out of respect to the Aboriginal people, right?
To the traditional owners, It's always been their preference, and
that was their wish.
they got their wish. But it's a fabulous place to visit.
Still
and
it's
so worth
really
it.
well set up. I mean,
it's so worth it.
And Kings Canyon, you can walk around. The Simpson Desert, it's only a day's drive east of there.
Yeah.
You can drive
McDonald
across.
Ranges are beautiful. West McDonald Ranges,
For
Kings
sure.
Canyon.
Yeah.
Mm.
That was actually
Gorgeous.
one of our favorite areas in Australia.
Yep.
I think it was actually, Uluru was very spectacular. But
It's pretty special, the whole Red Center.
Yeah, really great. Well, Rob, what other advice would you give as we start to wrap up here? If you had to kind of shotgun some things for people to think about before they travel to Australia, how they should be prepared. Obviously, do some research on the CDC. Make sure that you have the inoculations that you need. That's really important before you go into any country. Make sure you do some research on what you need for healthcare, what you need for evacuation insurance if you need to get out of an area in the middle of the country. Do some research before you leave. But what are some other things you'd like to just add in closing?
Yeah, you don't know me long enough, Scott, that I'm very much about this. But first, the important thing is to just go. You want to be well prepared, but don't think you've got to have this or how to tackle a crocodile. Important thing is be committed to go and have the courage to go, because there's so much of it you can figure out on the ground. Vehicle choice is important, but like any overlanding trip or full driving trip, it's the basics of how you're planning that. Simple things like having a tire gauge to manage your tire pressures, decent tires, decent simple camping equipment. Keep it simple. You don't need all the gear. Generally, the climatic conditions are just fabulous, especially in the outback in the summer.
Yeah, they really are.
You don't take a raincoat. You've got to be prepared for freezing at night sometimes.
Sure.
But you can plan for 3 or 4 months of the year where it's dry weather. So keep it simple. You might not even need anything more than just a cooler box for keeping things cool. So do your research. Make some friends online. They're going to get to know you, welcome to you. They're going to say, hey, when you come over, come by and I'll show you around the vehicle and tell you places to go. That's so easy to do now.
Yeah,
online.
for sure.
Take a good camera or a good phone, because and be ready for, the other thing I say to people traveling Australia is just expect the unexpected. And that's one of the, some of the most amazing experiences are the ones that you're not planning to have. It's the ones that surprise you on that 5 o'clock track in the afternoon, or the sunset you get, or the person that you meet in the introduction to a local guy at the bar that you get, and the stories that might come out of that. Or even if something goes wrong, then great. Well, someone else will come along and help you out, and just enjoy the fact that somebody's bothered to come all the way around the world to see their beautiful backyard. We're a welcoming nation.
What would you say is your best experience that you've had in Australia? What was the one thing that you were so surprised by?
So surprised by. There's been so many, Scott. So just going through the memory banks. I think, like I talked about before, one of my very best experiences was traveling a week across the desert with a mate and getting stuck. That's the most common story I tell. We got bogged for a whole day in this clay pan, but it was the best memories of my life. I mean, we drove through about a mile long of deep water. After that, think, wow, would I ever do that again? So that, and the experience I talked about before with my family in the Kimberley, showing them places that I spent my life mapping and were the real jewels, and then showing them to the next generation.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Matt? What was the top? What was the coolest thing that happened?
There's this little campground called Eddie's Beach Camp, north of Cooktown, and the sunset there. I've lucky enough to be there twice, and both sunsets were amazing. I don't know, it sounds weird, but there's a silica mine, and there's these little capes that jut out. I want to say that particular one is Cape Bedford, and
that's a special spot.
The sun sets over the ocean, then over this cape, and it lights up. I have these photos from there that I don't know. I think are the closest thing I've ever come to a National Geographic photo straight out of the camera. I mean, Cape York's just this wonderful place. I mean, I do not think Australians or Americans think of Australia, with Cape York. They always think of the desert, as I've kind of said. And that's it for me. I love it.
I did a trip with my dad from Alice Springs down to Melbourne. That was awesome. It was so neat to travel with his first time out of the country with me. So that was really neat. But Tasmania, I think, is one of my most favorite places in Australia. It was really special. All right, guys. So let's talk a little bit about what is next. So Matt, you're about to leave Overland Expo. What are you doing?
I don't know. I honestly have no idea.
You've got a Gladiator and
I have a Gladiator and a camper and a credit card and maybe a week until I'm due back in the office. So maybe Key West, maybe New Orleans, maybe Bar Harbor, cool. Maine. We're kind of trying to, while we're out on the East Coast, to take advantage of it. Overland Expo East has been great. We've met a lot of fantastic people. I think it's cool to see the community growing over here. I mean, I think we'd all kind of admit it's a West Coast centric industry, at least when it started. And it's cool to see people adopting the same kind of stuff over here, and just wonderful people. So
what's next for you, Rob? What are you doing tomorrow? What do you got going on?
I get to borrow, fortunately, one of these Bruder Expedition trailers and go with Chris from Expedition Portal and try out a new GMC truck. And we'll go knock ourselves out for a few days around here, exploring some trails and places I've never been before. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, sounds great. I'm looking forward to going home and writing up some of my experiences and maybe going camping. I think I'm going to go camping.
Camping, yeah, good idea.
Looking forward to that. Well, thank you all for listening. We appreciate your time. We're having a lot of fun with this, and we will see you in the next episode.